Hello, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast, wide receiver ranks for Week 13. I've got Pat Fitzmaurice. I've got Scott Pianowski. I'm Chris Welsh, and we are going to be breaking down all these bad boys for you. Top 36, the big questions, start, sits, all of it under the sun. We got you covered, and if you're looking for more ranks, just go and check us out over at fantasypros.com/rankings because it's a crazy week. There's games on Thursday, there's games on Friday, Sunday, obviously Monday. So if you guys want to see the latest in the ranks to help for your teams, if you can't get access to us, go to fantasypros.com/rankings. Check out all the positional ranks out there for this week. You can see rest of season. We've got Dynasty. We got you covered. Go and check that out today. Gentlemen, wide receivers. Not has been deep as usual that we're used to. A couple wide receivers that could be top 20, maybe taken off due to some crazy snow. We got a whole bunch to cover. Are you guys ready to jump into wide receivers?
Let's do it.
Raw. I was looking like a big raw, like, yeah, let's go. Well, all right. Let's get into it. Wide receivers, top 12, going to the big board. Here's a new entry into our number one overall rank. I do not believe we have seen him, but Nico Collins coming in at number one as far as all wide receivers go. It's an incredible matchup against the Jaguars this week. A.J. Brown, number two, Jamar Chase, Puka, and Justin Jefferson is your top five. Amon-Ra at 6, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, Cortland Sutton, and Terry McLaurin. That rounds out the top 12. I mean, no play had me on my seat bigger than last week than Terry McLaurin's just massive touchdown that saved so many different DFS lineup, FFPC, another big league. That was an absolute big savior, and it's something that just kind of happens with the Commanders and Terry McLaurin. You wish he would get more volume because he's such a great player, but man, it feels like we get one of those a week. So let's talk about McLaurin here. He's got an ECR of 12. He actually moved down one spot. He was 11 yesterday. You guys are a little bit on the opposite ends here. Scott, you are a tiny bit above consensus. Fitz, you are a bit below consensus. So Scott, let's start with you on the positive. Terry McLaurin, number 10 this week, going up against the Tennessee Titans, which is only a 2-star matchup rating according to FantasyPros. So what do you got on Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, I don't know if anything all that illuminating. I wish he'd get a healthier target share or target count. He's only made it to double-digit targets once this year, but he's got 5 games with 100 yards. He's got touchdowns in 5 or 6 different games. He's obviously the first read in this offense. Brown is significantly further down the pecking order. They won't have Eckler in this game. Zach Ertz is going to do what he always does. He'll catch 4 passes. He'll fall immediately when he catches those passes. He'll get 43 yards, and hopefully that does it for you. But at least we saw Washington, the buoyancy of the offense. You know, Jaden Daniels, he was able to run a little bit last week. I don't know if he was protecting a rib in previous weeks. He looked more back in form. It's important to remember that just because the Titans are a bad team doesn't mean their defense is bad. It's actually a quality defense, and I think their metrics would be even better if they weren't getting sold down the river by their offense almost every week because Levis just gives the ball away with all those negative plays that he makes. But yeah, we can quibble on, is McLaurin a lower-end wide receiver 1? Is he a higher-end wide receiver 2? It doesn't really matter. We're finally seeing the Terry McLaurin breakout season. He's finally tied to a plus quarterback, to somebody we can feel good about. And yeah, I mentioned on the running back show, I hope Garrett Wilson has this Terry McLaurin season down the road where he finally gets in the right situation. It's like that friend of yours has been in a bunch of bad relationships and they finally found the right person. And you're like, oh, that's great. They're going to have a nice Thanksgiving together. You know, they're going to get married. They're going to have kids. They're going to build a picket fence and all that, adopt a dog, all that stuff. So yeah, I think Terry McLaurin's finally having that year, and he's been a set and forget guy. I know Pat and I, sitting next to each other at the Kings Classic, we're fighting over Terry McLaurin because he's always been one of our favorite players. So happy to see him outkick his ADP. But just remember, I mean, he's a fence wide receiver 1-2. That's really what the upside is for him.
Pat, do you believe that it is like we don't need to quabble about, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2? Do you think that belongs there? Only reason I also say that is like there's this collection of wide receiver, like the top 8, it's like all the names you expect. But then, you start to get into the low teens. And, if you make that move for Terry McLaurin down to 16, he might be bumping up against a Lad McConkey. Cortland Sutton looks incredible right now. And again, I throw this in here because it's like if someone is out there and they start 2 wide receivers and they had drafted Jamar Chase and then they had got Cortland Sutton, Lad, and Terry McLaurin, those are the 4 wideouts. that's a quandary. That's a little bit of a problem. Like, who are you sitting out there? And you bump him down. So I kind of just push at you. Do you think it's a little arbitrary about, 10 to 16 is kind of in the same range, or do you have some general concerns putting him down there at 16?
Yeah, I mean, so I would rather play Sutton, who has been on fire ever since that weird Thursday night game where he got 0 targets. And ever since then, I think he's like top 5 in fantasy scoring. My concern with McLaurin, and it's not that much of a concern because I'm starting him in a lot of leagues this week, although not the Kings Classic where Scott wrestled him away from me, I believe. He only has 17 targets over his last 4 games. He actually has 10 fewer targets than Noah Brown over that stretch, which is weird. He's gotten kind of bailed out by big plays. The spectacular late game touchdown against Dallas last week, a 54-yard catch a few weeks ago against the Steelers that helped push him over the 100-yard mark that day. But McLaurin is only at double-digit targets once all season. He's averaging 11.1 yards per target, which is great. And, because he is such a good player, not that wild for him to outkick expectations in yards per target, although 11.1 probably a little unsustainable over the long run. Also, this Titans defense, even without L'Jarius Sneed, who's on IR, it's still a pretty formidable pass defense. So, yeah, I like McLaurin, of course. I think most people, except in the most shallow of leagues, are going to be starting him without question this week. For me, he's not quite a wide receiver 1.
And let me just back that up, Chris, because you mentioned Sutton and McLaurin in the same conversation. And man, Sutton is a player I really like. He reminds me so much of Doug Baldwin, just a great understanding of space and leverage. And since that bagel against the Saints, and nobody saw that coming, the Broncos have they've done what good teams do. They did something wrong and they fixed it. Since then, Sutton has between 8 and 11 targets in every game. He's had strong yardage totals in every game. He's scored 3 touchdowns. And Bo Nix has gone from a running quarterback who sometimes throws to a throwing quarterback who can run if he needs to. Cortland Sutton, to me, if I anticipate there may be some Sutton versus McLaurin comments or questions this week. And I know initially my first ranking had McLaurin higher, but I think that's wrong. I think Sutton, I've fixed it since then. I think Sutton is certainly the preference here. And I think we're going to look back and say Cortland Sutton was one of the right answers of the fantasy season.
And it's Knicks too. It's about Knicks. Last week, just a shout out to the Betting Pros app. We'll put up these like Betting Pros only plays. And my play of the week last week, if you had checked out Betting Pros, you would have got it for 3 or 4 days, was Bo Nix over 19.5 completions, because he had 3 straight weeks of 22 or more completions. 4 now. He's a completion monster. They've really perfected some of the big plays, but then the short line completions he can get, and that benefits a guy like Cortland Sutton. And it's kind of a stabilizer through the rest of the year. So I completely agree here. It's a weird collection of, you got these huge names at the top, Amon-Ra, Cooper, Mike Evans, and then it's like at the bottom of the first round, it's Cortland Sutton, George Pickens, and Terry McLaurin. And there's some negatives in there. Cortland Sutton is probably the safest of that entire group from a volume and big play standpoint.
And look at Bo Nix, by the way, making a run at Offensive Rookie of the Year, which was basically that trophy was already in the case for Jaden Daniels maybe a month ago or 6 weeks ago. And now Daniels still the favorite, but Nix is coming on fast to the point that whoever plays better the rest of the season, I think, is going to win that award. And remember, Cleveland, I know we think of the Browns defense maybe is better than it is because, they're a cold weather team. That's their identity. And Myles Garrett is a wonderful player. The Cleveland secondary has not played well at all. So if you need Cortland Sutton to come through on Monday, I think he's going to do just that against the Browns secondary. You can make hay on.
All right, we got wide receiver 2 talk coming up, some big guys. But first, they're saying that this week's Texas versus Texas and A&M is going to be the most expensive college football ticket ever, which is crazy. Well, guess what? Let Game Time make it easier on you than any other place when dealing with a huge game like that. You can get all-in pricing. They got the toggling the features, shows the total upfront, which is, by the way, my absolute 100% favorite thing on the planet. I don't like to be surprised by extra fees. I don't even know what they are. This is all-in pricing right at checkout, and you can see it on there. You can check out the panoramic view from the seat that you pick in the app before you buy it. They've got the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And they've got Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code FantasyPros for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code FantasyPros, FantasyPros, for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? It's game time.
And keep that promo code handy, because you may need it for Michigan, Ohio State. You may need it for Auburn, Alabama. You may need it for South Carolina, Clemson. They're just an awesome schedule of college football games, as there always is this time of the year. So
lock them all up.
Yeah, it's going to be a great Saturday. And what's better than getting to the stadium and you're doing some tailgating and watching one of those games?
I don't live in Buffalo, but I'd like to see what the panoramic views look like if they'll just put snow in there, what all the snow looks like for that Buffalo 49er game. All right, wide receivers 13 through 24. These would be the wideout twos. Malik Neighbors comes in at 13. We've got Drake London, Tyreek Hill down outside the top 14. T. Higgins, Ladd McConkey, Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith in Jigba, DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, and Jaden Reed. Let me throw a curveball that's not on the sheet here. And Pat, we'll start with you. Who would you rather this week, Tyreek Hill or Ladd McConkey?
Tyreek Hill. I'm just going back to the well with Tyreek Hill. I still, fundamentally believe it should work with him, even if it hasn't yet. Always a threat to break a big play. Although I am a little bit concerned about a team based in South Florida going up to Green Bay on Thanksgiving night, where the temperatures are probably going to be in the low 20s. How is that passing game going to function?
Where do you have him ranked?
I've got him at wide receiver 10.
Okay,
it's hard for me to move him out of wide receiver 1 range. And I know I keep going back to the well on Tyreek Hill, and that probably explains why wide receiver has been my worst position in rankings accuracy all year.
So same thing, Scott. Ladd McConkey or Tyreek Hill this week?
Yeah, I'm going McConkey. Tyreek Hill was wide receiver 4 and half-point PPR in that first week. That's just unusual run out, right? He has the incident before the game. Plays great anyway. His best performance since then in half-point PPR is wide receiver 16. And there's a lot of bricks in there. There's a 40, there's a 41, there's an 89. I realize there are some games too it didn't play. At some point, you have to accept. And look, I know some people are saying, "Hey, Jalen Waddle finally came in. Yeah, it's great." After 2 months of doing absolutely nothing, they don't want Tua taking deep drops. I don't like Miami at all. And I realize this is like the lowest hanging fruit, but I don't like Miami at all in this Green Bay environment. Night game, the fish out of water, frozen tundra. If it actually will be frozen, I'm still not even all the way in on Tua. I know a lot of people were singing his praises. He was really good last week. He's been pretty good since the return, but I'm never going to be in love with Tua. That's just where I'm at right now. And with McConkey, catches all of his targets on Monday, while Quentin Johnson was just finding new ways to drop passes, over the middle, on the boundaries, running wrong routes. I got to figure that Justin Herbert's going to say, who can I trust? It's Ladd McConkey catching all his targets. It's Will Dissly catching all his targets. McConkey hasn't been a volume monster, but I think this is the week maybe he gets into that double-digit target range. So I know it's floor over upside because, as Pat said, Tyreek Hill can make your week with that one big play. He can score an 80-yard touchdown. Maybe McConkey probably ostensibly can't, but I'm going to go with the base player. I know the lead guitarist is Hill, but I have to tax him for basically 3 months of, MIA production for this Miami team. I hate the matchup. So I'm going to regret this when Tyreek Hill has a monster game on Thanksgiving night, but I have him maybe 10 slots lower than Pat does.
Oh, yeah,
I was just going to say, would the Dolphins be the mammals out of water in Green Bay rather than the fish out of water?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you for that. The funny thing with Ladd and them, the
Dolphins will look. Darius Rucker tried to tell us this. The Dolphins will make you cry.
The Chargers want to go deep is part of the problem, and they don't use Ladd deep. And I hope they do make that change, like you're talking about. Like
he's so good. He's the comfort. McConkey's understanding of space and how to beat zone is so great. And the only reason Georgia didn't have to throw the ball like crazy. They had Bowers and McConkey on the same team. And just imagine if they played a team that couldn't run the ball. They had no defense or something. Obviously, they've always had stud defensive players too. That's how you get to multiple national championships. I want all the Ladd McConkey in Dynasty. Not that you're going to get him off his manager's hands easily, because I'm sure everybody likes him. But I am really impressed with McConkey. I think his rookie season has been better than it's looked, just because they haven't fully stepped into his role. And I can't wait to see what this offense is like. Maybe T. Higgins goes there next year. I just want Quentin Johnson out of my life. And, Palmer is never going to be somebody I'm going to trust snap to snap. They're playing Jalen Reagor, for crying out loud. Let's get some real receivers. in the LAC to help out McConkey. But I think Ladd McConkey next year is going to be like wide receiver 20 on my board to start the season.
Yeah, if Ladd had Puka like targets, he would probably put up Puka like numbers, which is kind of crazy. And shout out
Always open.
And shout out
Always
to
open.
Herbert and Ladd, because I took 5.5 over receptions. And it was one of those things where it felt like, in college where they understand, the marketing, the betting side, and they go for that extra field goal when they shouldn't. That last little target with like a minute left, I felt like Herbert did that just for me. So thank you, Ladd and Herbert. I appreciate that one. Let's talk about Calvin Ridley here. Calvin Ridley has got an ECR of 18. He was actually at 16 earlier. So he's moved down just a tiny bit. Scott, you've got him at 15. Fitz, you've got him at 21. Let's talk on the negative for a second. Fitz, you're not crazy off of the ECR, but you are lower than ECR, outside the top 20 on Calvin Ridley, who is going up against Washington, 4-star rating and an A- matchup grade, according to FantasyPros. What do you got on Ridley?
Yeah, I was buying the Calvin Ridley steam a few weeks ago when he was practically drowning in targets. But now I'm pumping the brakes a little bit. He's only drawn 6 targets in each of his last 2 games, and it's not like that was because the Titans were blowing anyone out in those games. One of them was a 10-point loss to Minnesota. The other was that wild seesaw game last week against the Texans. And obviously, whatever targets Ridley is getting are coming from Will Levis. So still high on him. Still think he's startable in most leagues, but he is just outside the top 20 for me.
Scott, you have got him higher. You've got him inside your top 15 this week. Do you have Calvin Ridley over Tyreek Hill?
I do, but it's not with a ton of conviction. I mean, there's other people getting touchdowns here. The Levis concern. I had hoped when you saw that 15 target game against Detroit where Ridley came off the bus just smoking, and then there's 8 and 9 targets the next 2 games. I thought the Titans were going to lean into their best player, and they haven't done that to the level I want. And that's what you need. Teams need to identify. The Giants should be doing this with Neighbors. His usage hasn't made any sense for me the last few weeks. He's complained about it this week. Maybe they'll fix it on Thanksgiving, but there's no reason why Calvin Ridley shouldn't have 10 targets every week. And I think the fact that he hasn't gotten that usage, I don't know if it's the coaching staff. I don't know to what degree it's Levis. Maybe defenses are prioritizing him. I admit that when I do rewatches, the Titans are one of the last teams I want to look at. It's just, I want to watch the fun teams. I want to watch the teams where I feel like the answer that I derive will actually have fantasy utility. I don't know that there is anything to figure out with the Titans necessarily, but I just wish the usage were a little bit heavier. I feel like it should be. And at this point, late in November, when teams tell you what they are, you have to believe them.
You know what kind of reminds me of? Last week, one of my favorite bets was Travis Kelce to get a receiving touchdown. And my logic was Panthers had given up 5 receiving touchdowns to tight ends over the last 3 weeks and 7 on the season. And then what happens? Noah Gray gets them. And I'm like, well, all right, my logic was right. It went in the opposite end. It's kind of the same thing I look at where it's like Calvin Ridley, you want more usage. You want the bigger plays. The logic is there, but then it's Nick Westbrook who ends up getting the big plays every single week, and he gets those touchdowns.
NWI, baby. 17 catches, 7 touchdowns now. It's what a fun player he is. I know this isn't necessarily an NWI segment, but let's just mention it, right? Since they traded Hopkins, he's on the field like 90% of the time. He's basically an every passing down player, and he scores short touchdowns. He had a long touchdown a couple of weeks ago. If you're in a pinch with a deeper league, some injuries or whatever, I don't know. I could ride with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine.
He has scored a touchdown on 20% of his targets this year. 30 targets, 6 touchdowns.
Kind of hard to predict, but at this point, who cares? You just get him out there and he gets you those points. Let's talk about Garrett Wilson with the Jets. There was some negativity, I believe, earlier. I think even in the RB show that we were talking about, just about the Jets offense in general. He comes in at ECR 20. Fitzy, you got him at 18. Scott, you got him at 22. Scott, let's start with you. I know you're just kind of negative on the Jets in general. The wide receivers kind of go back and forth. Garrett had kind of been like, the guy, and then that was slowly kind of fading away. You seem a little bit pessimistic about his value. He's almost outside of wide receiver 2, but not quite. So talk to us on starting Garrett Wilson in week 13.
Yeah, this is, Goodwill Hunting. This is where Robin Williams hugs you and says it's not your fault. And it wasn't Terry McLaurin's fault. It wasn't Allen Robinson's fault. It's not Garrett Wilson's fault. He's a tremendous player, and I just can't wait to see him get his Jaden Daniels that McLaurin got. We talked about this on the running back show. Aaron Rodgers has played every card he can. He got the offensive coordinator fired. He got Devontae Adams to come in. They've changed everything they can, and they can't seem to figure it out. It's late November, man. We can't be anchored to priors. I love Garrett. I think Garrett Wilson is easily one of the top 10 most talented receivers in the league. He might be even higher than that. Maybe he's in the top 5 at his peak, but maybe Tom Brady gave us a misleading understanding of what a quarterback could do in his 40s, because it's just, father time always wins. And we've seen a lot, Manning, lost it quicker than Brady did. And there's been other guys, Favre is obviously the comp that people make with Rodgers, goes to the Jets, has a lost season. I just don't want to watch the Jets. I don't want to bet on the Jets. I don't believe in the Jets. It's nothing about Garrett Wilson. It's the people throwing him the ball. It's the people calling the plays there. Adams is a mouth to feed too. It's just, I can't do it, man. I have him ranked where you're probably going to start him anyway, but who knows? Maybe you got lucky with Cortland Sutton later in your draft, or, maybe you made a trade and upgraded your depth, and you only start 2 receivers in your league. You could bench Garrett Wilson. I don't want you to be anchored at all to anything you thought Garrett Wilson was before the season, because that doesn't apply now.
Ranks almost look like Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams are becoming the Bucky Irving and Rashad White of wide receivers, where they're just kind of being ranked towards each other, and you're just not really sure. They could both eat in theory, especially more than a running back in the wide receiver side. But the questions on the offense in general are kind of out there. Fitzy, you got him at 18. Do you think there's a little bit more optimism and upside going up against Seattle this week? 3-star rating. It isn't a matchup. We have seen Garrett Wilson be more efficient than Adams in general. It's just that offense has just been kind of a disaster. And we know that there is a potential that Breece Hall could be out in this game. So that either can get messier, or they could rely more on throwing the ball. So 18, a little bit more optimistic. Do you think there's a little bit more optimism for Garrett Wilson? Because also the last thing, 18 kind of starts to throw a wrinkle in of like, maybe this isn't a guy we're actually starting. I know we label them as wide receiver 2s, but there are guys that have jumped up that really could give people fits, no pun intended, about like what decision they're going to make. So your take on Garrett Wilson?
Yeah, I know the last couple of weeks haven't been pretty. I think he's had like 9 catches for 56 yards over his last 2 games. And maybe it is right to be ready to wave the white flag on the Jets passing game. And it sounds like Scott has had that flag flying for a couple of weeks now. But it was not that long ago, weeks 5 through week 9. So during that 5-game stretch, that, again, not all that long ago, Garrett Wilson had 40 catches for 472 yards and 4 touchdowns, and was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy scoring over that stretch. So I just can't forget that. He's still inside my circle of trust, even if the passing game as a whole isn't. And I feel much better about Garrett Wilson than I do about Devontae Adams at this point. Like Garrett Wilson, I would start pretty much unconditionally. Devontae Adams, I would, there's some other iffy guys I would maybe consider starting ahead of Devontae.
All right, we've got wide receiver 3s coming up. But first, need a break from the crowded stores and endless gift lists? Restore your zen and embrace the natural power of hemp this season with Via. This holiday season, unwind and recharge with Via. Whether you're enjoying a quiet evening at home or embracing the festive cheer, Via's premium THC and THC-free gummies will help you find your perfect holiday balance. They also have 0 THC products. If THC isn't for you, you can still take advantage of their CBD line with products designed for sleep, focus, and energy that will keep you glowing all year long. This holiday season, gift yourself some peace of mind. If you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description. For a limited time during the holidays, Via is offering 25% off site-wide, plus up to 50% off select items and bundle. And if you're hearing this ad post-sale, you can still save by using code FantasyPros for 15% off. After your purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. It's Fantasy Pros. Please support our show and tell them we sent you this holiday season. Enhance your everyday with Via. Wide receiver 3s, 25 through 36. We start with Marvin Harrison Jr., Jamison Williams, Brian Thomas, DJ Moore, Khalil Shakir, and Darnell Mooney at 30. Jawan Jennings, Jacoby Myers, Tank Dell, Deebo Samuel, Jalen Waddle, and DeAndre Hopkins rounds out our wide receiver 3s. And yes, those are some low 49er wide receivers. I am not surprised that Jawan Jennings ranks higher than Deebo. It's how it should be. What I've been alluding to for a while, and Deebo was an absolute disaster this past week. Brock Purdy clearly wants to go to Juwan Jennings. I think that's the vibe. But this week, the low rank is this bad storm that in theory is being thrown at us. There's going to be a bunch of snow. It's been going early on. This is what pushes them out. So, Fitz, let's start with you on the 49ers wide receiver here. I don't know what you want to take out of it. Like, are they complete nothing burgers for you because there's snow? Obviously, if it clears up and it's just snowy around, that actually could be a big positive. That actually would benefit, if we're being honest, something like Deebo Samuel, if there wasn't a flurry going on. But the conversation is there might not be much there. So, A, do you think both 49ers receivers deserve to be outside the top 30? And B, is it Juwan Jennings over Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, a lot of moving parts here, mainly the quarterback situation and the weather. Right now, when I first did these rankings, I did it with the assumption that Brandon Allen would play again. Like, I haven't seen enough positive indicators that we're going to get Brock Purdy back this week. And I also did it with the assumption that it was going to be reasonably playable weather. Didn't realize that there was a blizzard moving into Buffalo. So I had both guys ranked rankings twins in the mid 30s. With this blizzard, and if Brandon Allen plays, I'm going to be moving Juwan Jennings probably down at least a dozen spots into the 40s and unplayable territory. I think a blizzard would hurt Deebo a little bit less because he's a short area receiver who might also take the occasional reverse. And, Deebo is so good with the ball in his hands that maybe, I don't know, maybe the snow, it hurts defenders who don't know where the ball carrier is going. The ball carrier knows where he's going. So I don't know. I might still have Deebo in the mid 30s with the snow. And I guess, the problem isn't when Deebo has the ball in his hands. It's getting it into his hands. And that was a problem last week when he let a couple easy throws go right through his mitts.
And there's, again, there's some debate on where it is. There's some stuff out there that thinks, we're going to have like big winds and massive snow. Some current weather things I'm showing out there. It's like a 50% chance of, snow flurry that's going to be going on. The wind doesn't look too crazy at this moment, but it's going to be like 20 degrees out. So you have to watch that throughout the week. It is dangerous to make massive assumptions like it is going to be some crazy, we can't even see it on the screen type of game or anything like that because we know production can happen. But at the end of the day, the question is like if Brandon Allen is in there, these wide receivers stink down at the bottom. So Scott, it kind of goes to the same thing with you. Do both of these wide receivers deserve to be in the 30s, even if Brock Purdy is active? And are you taking a lot of cues from the potential weather into ranking these guys?
Yeah, you hit the key word with the weather, which is wind. That's what I'm looking for. You can offset snow, and sometimes, as you guys talked about, defender doesn't know where he's going. The offensive player does. It only takes one slip and fall, and you have a 55-yard touchdown on your hands. Although I don't know if Deebo is ever going to have a 55-yard touchdown. He only has 2 touchdowns this year, and he has not been a target earner for a couple of months now. I agree with you, Chris, that it was overdue to move Jennings above Deebo a few weeks ago. I think the industry has been a little bit slow on that. Of course, last week with Allen playing, it just, it's like a throwout week. I get it. But how healthy is Purdy? Even if Purdy plays, which I think he will, I don't think Kyle Shanahan wants to get him hit a lot. We don't know the status of Trent Williams. Their offensive line has not been great this year. So you just have to get used to, these are not the 49ers we signed up for. We have to play for what they are and not what we want them to be. But I think Jennings is still somebody you could play as long as the wind isn't crazy in the forecast. This is, again, make this decision as late as you can. I realize in most leagues by 1 p.m. Eastern, you're going to have a kind of an idea of who you're playing and who you're not. But you'll make a much more informed decision on Sunday than we can do in the middle of the week. But yes, the takeaway for me is Jennings is certainly above Deebo, and we want stats. It's the numbers, not the names. That's one of the key takeaways for fantasy.
Welsh, Can I make one real quick point about this
Sure.
this weather? So I know like the inclination is for fantasy managers to overreact to weather situations. And I think it was last year we had a game in early December where it was a Saturday night game. Miami was visiting Buffalo and we had blizzard conditions forecast for the game. It turned out the wind wasn't that bad. There was snow, and the passing game, it was not a track meet by any means, but the passing games were relatively unaffected. If I recall, like Stephon Diggs still had like 70 or 80 receiving yards. I think Jalen Waddle had a long touchdown catch in that game. So anyone who like just flat out benched all their receivers in that game because of the weather. A couple of them, those people probably had regrets. So I would just like wind is key. Scott mentioned it. I think wind matters more with the passing games than the snow does. And, we saw the offenses work pretty well the other week with the Steelers in Cleveland in that snow game. Just the wind is the thing to keep an eye on.
I want to echo that the idea that, not that you want to be extreme in anything, most things land in the middle. But if you had to choose a path of overreacting to weather or underreacting to weather as a general rule of thumb, I would say underreact to it.
I think that's a smart way to put it.
People want to feel like they're managing their teams, and weather is one way that they can proactively manage things. But I think people tend to be guilty of over managing in a lot of cases.
And the toughest thing about this is 4 games going before Sunday that people are going to have to make decisions. So I think the way the not overreaction is just like be done with Debo. I think that's the biggest approach I would do. Jennings, yes, be out with Debo. There's conflicting things here. I just want to point out there are some meteorologist reports that are saying we could have 30-mile-an-hour winds in that game. That's not good. But there's also some meteorologist reports that are showing that most of the bulk of this will be Friday, Saturday, and it'll be a lot of cleanup on Sunday and just cold. And that's the thing where you're going to still have big offensive output. So, if you have Sunday decisions, there you go. Unfortunately, you might have to make some tough ones prior to that. And I think the easiest play is Debo kicks rocks.
Well, another thing too, you made a really great point there, Chris, that 3 games Thursday, 1 game Friday. So what does this mean? Your fantasy matchup will have a lot more definition in a lot of leagues on Sunday than it normally does when there's 1 game in the books. So this is going to be a case of then you can play to your, do I need floor? Do I need upside? Have I put up a bunch of points? Have I put up a couple of duds? What has my opponent done? I try not to be crazy, but just put your best lineup out there. But if you're in an extreme situation where you have a big lead or you have a big deficit, that may affect your ceiling and floor decisions. And maybe it's a case of, okay, I'm in pretty good shape here. I can make the safer play. I'll just steer clear of this Buffalo game, something like that. So just keep in mind that you're going to have more information about the personality of your matchup, maybe in some leagues in week 13 than a normal week would allow.
Exactly. And then, wait for Brock Purdy as well for this. All right. 2 more quick wide receiver ones. DJ Moore has got an ECR of 28, and we've got a difference between you guys. Scott, you were at ECR, so let's actually just start with you real quick. He breaks inside the top 30, a little bit more of the circle of trust, not quite there. You've got him at ECR. Your thoughts on what you saw with DJ Moore and Caleb Williams last week?
Yeah, I wish I could unsee that Caleb Williams sack in overtime where he held the ball for about 27 minutes. But Caleb did play better. The offense has been better with Thomas Brown calling the shots. And even though DJ Moore did not have the market share we wanted, he caught all of his targets. I still think he's the number 1 here, even if the target share last week didn't reflect that. And Detroit's a bad matchup. I mean, this is a good defense, even without Aiden Hutchinson. They have playmakers on all 3 levels. I thought this is a Darius White pickup at the trade deadline was a great move, but I feel like this is a game where DJ Moore is going to end the day with 10 targets, probably somewhere between 60 and 80 yards. I'll give him maybe a 40% chance at a touchdown. I feel pretty good about Moore.
Pat, you are a bit lower. You've got him back down at 35. Were you not buying what we saw to DJ Moore this past week?
Yeah, I'm not. Oh, by the way, a bit of breaking news. It sounds like Drew Lock is going to make the start for the Giants on Thanksgiving Day, which frees up Tommy DeVito to come eat pasta with you, Scott, on for Thanksgiving dinner. So yeah, DJ Moore was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy scoring last week. He came into that game as the wide receiver 42 in fantasy points per game. Caleb threw a season high 47 passes last week, and only 7 of them went to Moore. He actually had a 14.9% target share, which is pretty anemic. It helps though that Moore has been catching everything that's come his way lately. Last 2 games, 14 targets, 14 catches. I do think the Bears are going to struggle against the Lions, who have the lowest opponent passer rating in the league. And like slot receivers do pretty well against the Lions, but perimeter receivers do not. I don't think DJ Moore is someone I'm really looking to proactively get into my lineups this week.
All right, one more. Let's look at Brian Thomas with the Jaguars. Jaguars are back doing the business. He's actually moved up to 27. He was 32 a little bit earlier. So you guys are both lower than consensus now. There was a little bit of a flip. Fitz, you got him at 29. Scott's got him at 34. Pat, let's get some thoughts on Brian Thomas. He has left our circle of trust, but do you think, with Lawrence theoretically back, I don't even know if they've 100% confirmed if he is back this week. I think he is. Are we feeling better about Brian Thomas?
Better, yes. And, I feel guilty having him ranked higher than Scott because I know this is a player Scott absolutely loves and is probably more in love with than I am. But, mostly I'm just betting on a wildly talented young receiver who's pacing for, 1,000-yard season, has scored 5 touchdowns, averaging 10.9 yards per target in a bad offense. And now he gets a starting quarterback, so there's a little bit of hope. Texans aren't the easiest matchup, especially if they get to Trevor Lawrence with the pass rush, but they have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to receivers.
Same thing, Mr. Pianowski. Your thoughts on Brian Thomas Jr.?
Yeah, encouraged that he had 82 yards receiving against a good Detroit secondary. And hopefully the bye week has helped Jacksonville figure out a few things. I realize trusting Doug Peterson is not an easy leap, but I'm hoping 7 to 9 targets here. I'm going to bet on the talent and hope that maybe they streamline their offense out of the bye.
Big questions. If you guys have got more, go and check us out over on our Discord, fantasypros.com/chat. You can get in the Discord today, free. It's a bunch of great rooms, awesome community. People are asking questions. You want to upgrade to our premium side, you can get access to the AMAs. You can directly talk with Pat, myself, Andrew Erickson, Debro, and more. Plus, we've got live podcasts where you can ask your start and sit questions. When we're taking time off for Thanksgiving or we're not on a live stream, pretty much everybody's always there, so you can get your questions answered over on the Discord, fantasypros.com/chat. That's going to do it for the wide receiver ranks for week 13. fantasypros.com/rankings if you want to see more and how deep it goes. For Pat and Scott, I'm Chris Welsh. We'll talk to you next time right here on Fantasy Pros.